What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to let you guys know that this is another 2-hour Megamix. If you guys are enjoying the daily uploads and these longer videos, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this one. I think about 1,500 likes is a good goal for these longer 2-hour videos. Doing all of the above really helps out the channel and to make sure that I can continue to do these for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts of making these videos is reading your guys' thoughts on the stories therein. Without further ado guys, I will let you enjoy the next 2 hours of true scary stories, and I will see you guys again at the end of the video. Have a great day. When I was a young kid, I had a best friend named Mike. We did basically everything together for many years. We slept over at each other's houses on a fairly regular basis, and we didn't even have to ask our parents' permission when we did so. That was how often we did this. We'd just say, "Hey, I'm sleeping at Mike's tonight," or "Hey, I'm going over to Jack's." And that's all there was to it. I tended to sleep over at Mike's house more often than he did mine, though. This was because his dad was a single parent, and he would often work at night, even when we were really young and shouldn't have been left home alone. We spent a lot of time by ourselves. The night that this happened, we were around 12 years old, and I was over at Mike's house while his dad was working. This night, it was actually storming pretty bad outside too. Me and Mike both actually really liked storms, so that was no big deal to us. It also put us in a real spooky mood, so we were telling each other creepy stories. I have to admit to getting a little bit scared. We even ordered a pizza, and Mike and I both answered the door to go grab it. The delivery guy was some new guy, and not the normal guy at the local pizza place that we normally had. He asked for our parents to get the pizza too, but Mike told him they were busy and took the pizza himself. After quite a bit of time of scaring ourselves, the storm was getting even worse. Eventually, we heard this horrible noise that sounded like something slamming up against the house. It caused us both to jump, and I was definitely scared. Mike told me it was probably just the door to the basement. He said the door didn't latch very well, and occasionally, when it was very windy, it would get blown open and then slam shut again. It was pretty windy outside that night, so I guessed his explanation made sense. We were eating pizza in Mike's bedroom and playing some video games when I decided I wanted to get some pop to drink. Mike decided to come with me. We had scared each other so much that I don't think either of us wanted to be by ourselves at that point. We both left the room and started walking down the stairs to the first floor, when suddenly Mike stopped. He put his arm up to make me stop too. The staircase led to the kitchen, which was in the back of the house. He pointed over to the door, and I saw what he did. The door was broken. The area around the knob and the lock had been destroyed, and the door swayed in the wind, slamming shut hard again. That was the noise we had just heard. If that wasn't scary enough, there was a flash of lightning which brightened up the entire house in that moment. In the brief second that everything was illuminated, I could see the shadow of a person on the wall of the kitchen. The living room was adjacent to the kitchen, which meant that someone was lurking around in the living room of the house. We tried to be quiet as the two of us turned and hurried our way back up the stairs. There was enough thunder going on that it was easy for the sounds of us moving about to be drowned out. We made it back to the room and locked ourselves in. I brought up that if the intruder was able to break open the kitchen door, then he would have no problem breaking open the bedroom door either. Mike just told me to shut up. We called Mike's dad and told him what was going on. He told us to hide in the room and not make a sound, and that he would come home right away. Mike and I got into his bedroom closet and hid inside, listening to the storm around us while we waited to see what would happen. It didn't take long before we heard a loud pounding on Mike's bedroom door. At first, we thought it was whoever this intruder was, until Mike's dad called out to us. Both of us jumped up and ran to the door to let him in. For those wondering why we called Mike's dad and not the police, well, Mike's dad is a police officer. He got to the house quickly with his partner before the intruder had a chance to escape and easily apprehended him. The intruder turned out to be the new pizza delivery guy. I guess when we answered the door, he made the correct assumption that we were home by ourselves, so he broke in to do who knows what. We stayed home by ourselves after that still, but we started making frozen pizza instead. This story happened back when I was 16 years old. I had recently gotten my first job, which was working at a restaurant. I remember that during this time, my parents let me use their old car, which was barely running. Actually, it broke down on me once, but we were able to get it running again. For a few weeks, the car was actually pretty reliable. I drove it to and from school and work without any further problems. Well, one night I worked sort of late, and after getting off, I started driving home. It usually took about 15 minutes or so. We lived a little ways away in a more rural area. As I was driving down these back roads, they were very quiet and mostly just woods on either side of my vehicle. All of a sudden, my car just started losing power out of nowhere and dying in the middle of the road. I didn't know what to do. Eventually, it slowed down to a complete stop and refused to go anymore. I got off to the side of the road and tried to start the car over and over, but nothing happened at all. It was the same thing as before, when it had previously broken down. I'm not exactly a car person, so I wasn't really sure how I was supposed to get things moving again. I took out my phone to call my parents, but when I did, I realized my phone was dead. I couldn't charge it because my car had no power. I really didn't know what to do now. I wasn't near any businesses or anything at all, really. There were a few private properties around, but I didn't know if it would be a good idea to go to someone's abode at this hour. I hoped that maybe my parents would realize that I hadn't returned after a while and go out searching for me. They knew that the car had a tendency to break down and that this was a possibility. In the meantime, though, I didn't know what to do. I just sat there and looked around. Nobody was even driving by or anything. Before long, it started to feel kind of spooky out there. The woods were pretty dense on both my left and right, and I could hear crickets in the background, sometimes an owl or trees rustling in the wind. Other than that, things were very quiet though. I really did not want to get out of my car. I remember that probably 10 minutes into just sitting there, I was casually looking around when I happened to glance to my right. Off in the woods a short distance, I could just barely make out a man standing halfway behind a tree. It was a man with a thick beard, and that's all I could really tell. He was obviously hiding behind the trees and watching me. I was so creeped out when I saw that my heart started racing like crazy. I felt helpless. What could I do? And why on earth was there a man in the woods hiding and watching me? He just kept standing behind his tree, watching me for more than 5 minutes. All of a sudden, the man just turned around and disappeared back into the woods. I still felt really scared. I felt maybe it was slightly better though now that he was gone, but not a whole lot. Who knows where he'd gone to? Probably 10 minutes went by, with me just sitting there and constantly looking around. I kept wondering if the man would return. Just as I was starting to feel slightly better, I looked over to my right and saw the man once more. This time, though, he emerged fully from the woods and began slowly walking toward me. I watched him go all the way to the edge of the ditch on the side of the road. Now he was less than 10 feet away from me. The bearded man walked to my passenger side door and tried opening it. He then calmly walked around to my driver's door and tried opening that too. I was so scared that I just ducked and covered. I buried my face in my hands and tried not to look. I heard him poking around my car for a little while. He tried just about every single door and even tried to pry open one of the windows. He came over to my driver's side again and started banging on the window with both fists. The entire time, he didn't say a single word. I looked over and saw his creepy face looking right at me. It was probably the most scared I've ever been. I truly didn't know what was going to happen. At least my car had been locked, but I couldn't drive it to get out of here, and he might be able to break in. After banging on my driver's window for quite a while, the man stopped and started circling to the other side of my car again. When he made it around, I saw headlights in the distance behind me. This made me feel slightly better. As they approached, I heard the sound of a car honking over and over again. At first, I was confused as to why this car driving towards me was honking so much, but as it got closer, I recognized it to be my parents' vehicle. The man looked stunned like a deer in the headlights before turning and running away from my car and disappearing back into the woods. My parents' SUV pulled over to the side of the road behind me, and I got out and ran over to them. I jumped inside their vehicle, and they asked me what was going on. I told them how my car had broken down and my phone was dead. This random guy just came out of the woods. We were all safely inside my parents' vehicle now, and they called the police and reported that suspicious man. He did not come back out of the woods, and we stayed there until the police arrived. When they got there, we spoke with the officers and also arranged for a tow truck to come and grab my car. Meanwhile, they searched the woods, but were unable to locate this mysterious man. It really creeps me out, knowing that he got away. I mean, I don't even know where he came from, or what he was even trying to do. It still creeps me out just thinking back to it. I'm just glad that I'm okay in the end. I remember when my son was a toddler, I made a late-night run to a 24-hour Walgreens to pick up a prescription for him. We live in an urban area where Walgreens was busy at that time of night. It was also right next to a metro stop and was not a place where most people drove. Parking was super limited as a result. I ended up parking at a curb a bit away from the store. I remember that once I got back to my vehicle, a youngish, very normal-looking man approached me out of nowhere and came right up to my window. I rolled it down slightly, and he started to speak to me. "Hey, I think I know you from such and such place. Do you remember me?" I had actually been to that place that he mentioned before, and it was a popular spot as well. I tried to remember if I'd ever seen him, but in that split second that I lost my focus on him, his face completely changed. All of a sudden, he grabbed the door of my handle and started to rip it open. Immediately, I slammed my foot on the gas and put the car in drive. I peeled out of there, looking straight ahead and making sure I didn't run into anything. Only when I arrived at a red light a few streets down did I realize that the overhead light was on. He'd actually managed to open the door a bit. I hadn't realized it in the moment, but he was that close to getting me. I never forgot his face and how it changed instantly in that moment. When I think back on it, I remember one of Ted Bundy's potential victims describing how his face went from normal, attractive, and friendly to black-eyed and unrecognizable. That's exactly how this man's face transformed. There were some missing women in the area in our city, and I always wondered if it was that suspicious guy who had done it. I remember I was in Vienna during Christmas break. There's a very large open-air market in the middle of the city, and thousands of people were milling about, eating, drinking, and shopping. It was the evening when a very attractive blonde woman bumped into me. In accented English, she apologized, and I said no worries. We started chatting, and she said she was there for New Year's, visiting a friend of hers. I mentioned that I'm American, but Polish in heritage, and we continued to talk for several minutes. The woman said she was hungry and wanted to get some food, so I offered to buy her a slice of pizza at a booth. I got one for both of us. She took a bite and immediately said she didn't like it, and suggested we go to a place away from the town center. Something about how quickly she rejected the food, though, which was actually quite good in my opinion, made me feel slightly uneasy. I wished her a pleasant evening and walked away. I walked around the town center for a while when I coincidentally observed her walking down a back alley. I observed her conversing with two large men hiding inside of it, and very quickly, I realized that she was trying to bait me and draw me down that alley so they could at the very least mug me, or maybe do something even worse. I don't think it's just Spider-Man that has a sixth sense. Sometimes you can definitely tell when something is not right. So I had a stalker situation. I used to work at Walmart, and while I was working, one time a guy came in and said hello to me. I was sort of weirded out because he knew my full name. I sort of recognized him, and he said he went to high school with me. I tried to think a bit, and it started to click. I thought I did remember seeing him back in school once or twice. We talked for a bit, and he seemed like a nice enough guy. The next day, I got a friend request on Facebook. I added him and didn't think anything of it. A few days later, though, some of the other people I was friends with on Facebook sent me a message asking who this guy was. He was sending them all friend requests and messages asking for more information on me. I never kept my personal phone number on Facebook either, but somehow he managed to obtain it and began calling and texting me. He even retrieved my email somehow as well. He sent me this long letter about how he didn't actually go to school with me, but he always loved me and wanted to marry me, and how perfect we were for each other. He asked who all the guys were that I was friends with, and said that it should just be me and him. It took me really off guard, since we'd only talked for the first time a few nights ago apparently. I responded politely and told him I had a boyfriend. I said it seemed like he was a nice guy, but I didn't feel that way about him, and we didn't know each other well enough. Well, that was a bad choice of words. He started showing up everywhere. When I was out shopping, when I was eating at a restaurant, when I was walking around town. Even if I didn't see him there, he would still send me an email about if I enjoyed this activity with this person that I was with. I finally told this guy he needed to leave me alone. He sent me this long-winded email about how he was going to make me pay. He was going to have his way with me and then get rid of me. I refused to give him a chance, and so he would make me give him one. He said all the other typical stuff too about what a selfish bitch I was. He then laid out my schedule and routine precisely. There was nowhere I went that he couldn't find me. I ended up calling the police and actually got a restraining order against this guy. He got into some trouble as well, but I'm not really sure how much. I was scared for a while after that he would return and begin his stalking once more, but thankfully I've not heard from him since then. I used to work at a Walmart where the managers didn't really care about their staff. I've since learned that they were fired, so that's something. The customers were always the worst part, though. We had this one regular, a pretty huge guy, who would consistently cross boundaries with me. He would try to grab me whenever he was with his buddies. He would grab my butt even after I straight up yelled at him and even slapped him once. I begged the managers to ban him from the store, but that didn't happen. The best they would do was kick him out if he went too far, which usually involved him grabbing in some way. He was always free to return the next day, though, because he was a good customer. One Saturday, I was on my cigarette break in the alley beside the store. All of a sudden, this jerk ambushed me. He snuck up behind me and grabbed me by the waist. He started to drag me backwards and even tried to lift me up and over his shoulder. I immediately went into fight or flight mode. I bashed my head right into his face and apparently ended up breaking his nose pretty badly. When he dropped me back down, I laid on the ground and kicked up into his groin several times. Now that I had a moment to think with him reeling in pain, I realized who it was that was attacking me. I took my lit cigarette and started to jab it into his arm and face. I think I did a fair bit of screaming as well. I started spitting on him. I was so angry and afraid I was doing whatever I could to stop his assault. I don't have a very clear memory of the rest of that day. I guess the security guys heard my screaming at some point and came over to help. The cops were called as well. When the cops came, I gave my statement, and the man did in fact get arrested. I quit that job and never returned to that crappy place. I never got a chance to find out what happened to the guy really, or even what his specific motivations were for grabbing me and trying to pick me up and take me away. I moved to Austin a few months later, and I didn't have to deal with that guy ever again. This was late at night. I was driving out of a Walmart parking lot when on the way out, someone tried to cut me off while I was making a turn. This almost resulted in our cars crashing. The other driver was obviously very upset and started following me, flashing his lights to blind me. They forced me to park my car by blocking it. This guy got out of his vehicle with another man and grabbed a screwdriver. They ran over and tried to open my door, which I managed to get locked just in time. He tried smashing my window, but I wasn't so foolish as to get out of my car and risk being stabbed now. I reached for my phone and started calling a few of my buddies who lived nearby. Some strangers started running over to the guy too. He and his friends saw they were very quickly becoming outnumbered and decided to escape in their vehicle. Overall, it was a very scary experience. I only just managed to lock my door in time. If I had done it any slower, that man would have plunged his screwdriver directly into my neck over something that was all his fault in the first place. This happened a few years ago, which is important for later. I was walking my dog like I always did. We stayed in a small town where nothing ever happened, and most people would be in past 7 p.m. I used to walk my dog every evening at around 6 or so not very many people were out. I walked that way every day, and I really enjoyed the peace and quiet. Usually, I would go with my mom, but that night I went by myself because she just so happened to be busy. I was walking by the main road, and on the other side of the path was a shop. My dog decided to do his business on the ground right outside. Embarrassed, I started to clean up after him when I saw a silver car pull up and stop outside of the shop. At first, I assumed it was someone that was going to go inside and buy something. I picked it up and stood up straight and was about to continue on walking when the man in the car rolled down his window and called out to me. I could tell that he had an accent and thought he must be on a holiday or something and need directions. In the passenger seat was another man, holding a notepad and a pen. In the back was a dog cage. I said hi, and he asked where a certain hotel was. I told him where. He thanked me, and just as I was about to walk off, he asked me, "How much for your dog there?" I stopped and looked at him confused, and he said it again. I told him that obviously she wasn't for sale. I noticed the man in the passenger seat was writing down something in that notebook of his. The man laughed and said he loved dogs, then in a dead serious voice, asked how much it would be to purchase me then. Him asking how much my dog was creeped me out, but this was way too creepy. I told him I was not for sale, and laughed awkwardly, not sure what to do. Again, the man in the passenger seat wrote something down in his notebook. After a moment of awkward silence, he laughed back. I said I had to go, and started to run back home. When I turned around the corner, I looked behind me, and saw the car was now following me. I didn't want to go straight home, because then they would know where my house was. I went down an alleyway where a car couldn't follow, and I managed to just about lose them. About a year after that, I was in a Zoom call. A guy from another town not far from mine, and a few other people were telling each other weird things that had happened to us. The man mentioned that he was walking his dog when a silver car pulled up next to him and started asking weird questions about his dog. Then they asked the guy if he had any sisters for sale. I told him that's exactly what happened to me. We both knew it was the same man. He also noted the man with the notepad in the passenger seat and the dog cage in back as well. What really made me want to share this story, though, is a few months ago this year, my mom's friend said her friend was out walking her dog when a man in a silver car did the same thing to her and began to follow her. This time, though, it followed her all the way to her brother's house, and they even got out and tried to go inside. When her brother emerged, though, the men got back into their car and fled. First of all, this story is the story of my worst hitchhiking experience. This incident was sketchy as fuck, but I still wouldn't give up my love for hitchhiking. I'm a 21-year-old and was 20 at the time. I'm from Finland, by the way. Anyway, on to the story. This happened on the 2nd of December last year in Kalamata, Greece. I had been hitchhiking for quite a while at that point. I had started from Budapest and hitchhiked through 7 different countries with only positive outcomes. This story begins around 11 a.m. on a Saturday. Some hours before, I had woken in my hammock, strung up behind the castle ruins in the only place that had trees that weren't someone's private property. I was tired from lack of sleep, caused by the cold night and early waking. After a quick tour of the town and some breakfast, it was time for some more hitchhiking. I made a sign with the words Athens and Sparta in Greek. I was standing by a road leading to a roundabout, where the first exit goes toward Areopoli, and the second towards Sparta, and the third towards Athens. A lot of cars drove by, but nearly all of them took the first exit. It took at least an hour for the first car to stop. It was this small, quite old and worn-out white car, and driving it was an older guy around 60 or so, who looked a little bit dirty. He didn't really speak English, but I could tell he was going to the same area I was headed. I was a bit frustrated by the fact that pretty much all the cars were going toward a different area, so I thought this might be my only chance and jumped in. We were trying to have a conversation, but without a shared language that wasn't really possible. We did manage to introduce ourselves, and I tried to explain where I was from. He smoked and offered me a cigarette too, but I refused. We drove just shy of 6 kilometers or so before the guy suddenly made a left turn and we ended up in his yard. He stopped the car, got out, and signaled me to follow. Without any way to leave this situation, there wasn't much I could do but do so. I took my bags and felt a little confused. It was a small house on the mountain, surrounded by sheep and olive trees. There was a dog sleeping in the sun that didn't seem to be bothered by our presence at all. He walked to his balcony that surrounded his house. I put my bags down and joined him on the balcony. He lit up another cigarette and asked if I wanted to eat something or maybe take a shower. I refused, and with the help of Google Translate, I asked why we weren't going to Sparta. He told me I could sleep at his house, and he'd drive me there tomorrow. I explained I would like to get there today, so staying at his place was not really an option. I pointed out that there were not many vehicles going past his home, and only some 4 to 5 hours of daylight left. Every minute was valuable to me now. He didn't really seem to understand me. I got up and walked through the door to grab my bags. I put my backpack on and picked up my other bag. I turned over and saw him inside. I tried to walk out, but he stopped me. He locked the door and turned toward me. At the moment, I was not panicking or anything. I didn't know what exactly he was doing. He jokingly offered me some food. I kept saying no to him, but he didn't care. Now he got up right in front of me, and I was starting to feel very disturbed. He suddenly grabbed me by the crotch, and I could feel this cold, tingling sensation shivering through my body as my hair stood on end. I started to raise my fist in order to hit him. We stood like this for a couple of seconds, and thank God he let go. I was still feeling the urge to hit him, but I didn't. I managed to slip past him and unlock the door, and I was free just as suddenly as I'd been locked up. I walked out feeling creeped out by the experience. I walked past the dog to the road, where I saw 2 pickup trucks on the other side. The trucks were surrounded by a group of hunters carrying shotguns on their shoulders. That made me feel a lot safer. I kept walking by the road for a while before a car passed me by. It was quite warm and in the middle of nowhere. I emptied one of my water bottles and turned it upside down, showing it to the cars passing by so they would think I was out of water. That worked, and the second car stopped. I got to Sparta and later that day to Athens safely, but I felt disgusting until I got to take a shower. All the kindness I had experienced while hitchhiking before this event made me too comfortable, and I let my guard down. I think humans are good by nature, but trusting every stranger is a bit of a stretch. Hi all, 34 and female, and not really looking for advice. I just wanted to share my story. Many years back, I dated a man-child, relatively the same age as myself. We got along quite well, and he presented as gentlemanly, hospitable, kind, and loving. In hindsight, though, things escalated quite quickly. We went from being friends to being exclusive within a month. Not enough time to truly know somebody. This story is quite lengthy, so I'll do my best to shorten it without leaving out integral details. We saw each other daily and mostly hung out at his place. That was fine with me in the beginning, as I'm rather introverted. A couple of months into our relationship, though, I started to question why we weren't ever leaving the house, why we weren't going out and experiencing new things, or trying out new hobbies. His responses were always cloudy, and he tried to redirect the conversation, thinking I was truly stupid and couldn't tell that this was an obvious avoidance tactic. And that was the point where I started to become curious, and from there it went downhill. I'm not an intrusive person, but considering this man was my partner, I had a right to inquire as to why we were isolating ourselves. After some mild questioning for a few weeks, I noticed he began to create some distance. This was a noticeable change that was hard to ignore and pretty much confirmed my suspicions. I'm not one to make a decision based solely on assumptions, though. I'm a bit ashamed to admit this, but one night while he was sleeping, I went through his phone. I still feel disgusting. I found 100% proof that I was the side chick. I could not believe it, and I still can't. I was with this person daily. Well, that confirmed why we were so confined to his home. It was perplexing because she apparently had no idea about me, and I had no idea about her either. It was about 2 a.m. when I'd looked through his phone. There was no way I could sleep beside him for the remainder of the morning, so I quickly got out of bed, collected my things, and went home. The next day, I believe he realized what happened, though. He never contacted me to see why I left. Things remained silent for the entire day. But I received a phone call later that evening. I confronted him. Again, I'm ashamed to say I did take photos of the evidence, as I knew he would try to lie to me. The fury in his voice was palpable. He tried to blame everything on me while ignoring his infidelity. It was utterly pathetic. He had created this idea in his head that I was going to contact his other girlfriend and tell her all his wrongdoings. I would have done this, however, as I was looking through the phone, I realized this other girl was very sheltered, completely oblivious as to what was going on. Knowing the type of guy he was now, I was afraid he would retaliate against both myself and her. I thought that eventually she would find out on her own. I do regret not informing her. However, I made my decision and I can't go back to the past to change that. That's where my nightmare began, though. He was so paranoid and so confident I was going to contact his other girlfriend that he began to constantly threaten me. I advised him it was none of my business, and she would eventually find out that he was deceitful sooner or later. All I wanted was for him to leave me alone and never speak with me again. Obviously, he did not, though. He continued to harass and threaten me, and even told me he was going to kill me so the secret wouldn't get out. Only a few days later, things completely erupted. His paranoia exceeded to levels I'd never seen before, and he sent me a different kind of threatening message. I have compromising photos of you, and I will release them. No matter what I said or how I phrased it, he refused to leave me alone. I asked him if that was true, and said that if so, I was going to call the police. 5 minutes later, I received 11 messages in succession. A few were videos, photos, and even personalized animations of myself that I had never seen before. These had been taken without my consent and were extremely intimate and compromising. Unbeknownst to me, he had set up hidden cameras around his home. These weren't just threats. These were screenshots of actual images, videos, and animations that he'd already uploaded onto various sharing sites. Luckily, this man lacked intelligence, as he just directly sent me the evidence of his own crimes. There was nothing I could do to stop the uploads. That had already happened, but I immediately went to the police. They did manage to take some down. However, there were no promises, as once a photo or video is uploaded, it can be immediately archived. This forever altered my life. I don't see relationships the same. I can't be intimate, form strong bonds, and I become apathetic. I'm forensically observant and have difficulty trusting anyone, even my family. To my surprise, the police were very efficient and took it seriously and treated me very well too. I was granted an immediate protection order. He broke that quite quickly and tried to threaten me to drop the charges. He was so pathetic he got his mommy to ring me and try to persuade me as well. I immediately called the police and they took action though. It ended up going to court and I won. It's not the result that I wanted. However, he did get his name placed on that good old sex offenders registry, which is far more egregious than people may think. Nonetheless, this is beyond life-changing. Hello, my name is Christoph, and I'm a high school student in my first year. I'm 16 years old. This story took place during the second week of Easter vacation in 2023 when I was about 15. I want to mention that it happened in my mother's house as well. At the time, my mother had decided to renovate the kitchen because it was getting somewhat outdated. There was this blonde guy with blue eyes who came in to start the work, which involved putting up plastic sheets on the walls and a divider in my living room, which was next to the kitchen. At the end of the day, I had to go to the dentist to pick up a dental impression, and my mother informed the worker that we would be back in 1 hour and 30 minutes. However, since the appointment was just to pick up an item, we ended up returning much sooner, only after 45 minutes or so. On the way back, my mother suggested getting kebabs and doing a good deed by dropping off the worker at the train station. When I returned to offer him a ride, I noticed he was very uneasy, with a nervous smile. He insisted everything was fine though. I told him we could give him a ride, and he agreed. Along the way, he explained his name was Brian, and that he was originally from Moldova. He mentioned that he lived alone in Paris, but had 2 children living in his home country. We arrived at the station, dropped him off, grabbed our kebabs, and went home. After finishing eating, I decided to take a bath, as I loved doing that all the time. This time, to my dismay, the water turned from hot to cold pretty quickly. I spent 2 hours in lukewarm water, then got out and returned to my upstairs room. Upon opening the door, though, I noticed my PC was open and turned on to my lock screen wallpaper, even though I distinctly remembered closing it before going downstairs. I asked my mother if she had been in my room or touched my PC at all. She said no, she had been in her room watching the news. After a quick search of my room turned up nothing, I decided to simply go to sleep. At around 5 a.m. though, I suddenly woke up sweating, shivering intensely. That had never happened to me before. I had an immense feeling of danger, that someone or something was lurking nearby. I grabbed a knife from my collection. I have a passion for edged weapons. With my small knife, I searched my room once more, but found nothing. However, the feeling did not go away. I locked my door and messaged my mother to see if she was awake and had the same feeling as me. She didn't respond. I waited for 3 hours until I heard her walking in her room. She came to see me and I explained what happened that night. She told me I was probably just being paranoid and that everything was perfectly fine. She also warned me that Brian would arrive at around 10 a.m. to continue the work, and that since she would be leaving for work herself, I would be left alone with him. She assured me that I wouldn't need to go downstairs to let him in, because she had told him she kept the keys in a woodshed next to the door. She went to work and I went back to sleep, locking my door. I woke up at 11:30 and went downstairs to make some food in the basement, because the kitchen was under construction. When I didn't find Brian there, I didn't immediately think much of it. I went back upstairs and ran into him, but as soon as I saw him, my bad feeling returned. He tried to talk to me, but I ended the conversation and went back to my locked room. 10 minutes later, Brian knocked on my door, asking for help carrying something. I didn't respond because I really didn't want to see him again. He started trying to open my door and even began kicking it and slamming himself against it. My first instinct was to grab a knife and lock myself in the bathroom and call the police. I explained in a panic what was happening, and the woman on the line said she was sending 2 cars, which would arrive in approximately 10 minutes. While waiting, Brian managed to break down my door and enter my room, and began breaking down the bathroom door as well. I told him I'd already called the police, and they would be arriving at any minute. I was also armed with a knife, and I would not hesitate to use it against him. Upon hearing this, he stopped banging on the door and left. The police arrived and caught Brian just as he was attempting to flee. My mother immediately came home, saw me, and burst into tears, telling me she should have listened to me. A few days later, the police called to explain that Brian was wanted for abduction, identity theft, torture, and even murder. I believe the bad feeling I had during the night was him returning and hiding outside my room in the house. He knew where the spare keys were hidden. He's now in prison, though, and I hope to never see him again. Thank you for listening to my story. It's amazing how our instincts can be very useful. I'm glad I was able to lock my door, because previously I couldn't, as I didn't have a key. I also think my weird passion for knives, because I don't know if Brian would have left if I hadn't mentioned it, especially thanks to the police, who arrived very quickly and caught him. This happened when my brother and I went out into the woods to catch bugs. It was summer, and I believe I was in the 5th grade at the time. There's a mountain in my hometown. It wasn't very popular because it wasn't an easy climb. Plus, summer in Japan can be very harsh, even for the most experienced hikers. The mountain range is pretty big, but my brother and I love to be outside. We felt as if we had exhausted our usual bug hunting locations on that day. I don't think we found much more than a couple of beetles and maybe some bees. I turned to my brother and said, "Why don't we try to find a new spot?" With that, we went further off into the mountainous woods, exploring. I remember we discovered a little trail off the beaten path that we hadn't checked out yet, so we headed a little ways up the mountain to check that out. In my hometown, the temperature during summer is usually 35 to 37 degrees Celsius, but it can sometimes reach close to 41. Of course, there's also the humidity that comes with living close to a mountain range, so naturally it was a really hot afternoon. We arrived at the trail off the beaten track and headed off on it. As we got a little deeper into the brush, out away from the main trail, I noticed there was something different about this area. It felt a lot cooler, as if I was suddenly in one of those walk-in freezers. Goosebumps were breaking out all over my body. It was the strangest thing. I had this intuition that this trail we were on was inherently dangerous. I wasn't fearful of running into a bear, or even worried about getting injured on the terrain. I was worried about something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I was aware of this strange kind of feeling of apprehension, but it wasn't strong enough for me to turn back around. I felt for sure that my brother and I would find some interesting bugs out here. We were always on the lookout for stag beetles. That was what I was hoping for that day. We were going further and further away from the ways we knew, and heading deeper and deeper into uncharted territory. I was still not willing to turn back, but I suddenly felt as if something was even more strange. I looked around and noticed that some of the trees were quite thick, but many of them were thinner than the usual trees on the mountain range. Next to those thin trunks were these little altar-looking things. I'm not just talking about a couple of them either. next to the strange-looking trees. The forest around us was filled with dozens of them. It was seriously strange. The little altars, for lack of a better term, were set at different levels from the ground. By that, I mean they were all made of different heights, but they all seemed to be made out of stone. Another common theme was the fact that placed on each one of these strange altars were wilted and dead flowers. There were also small bowls which were commonly used for salt. By the way, here in Japan, small piles of salt are a traditional practice handed down from one generation to another. We believe that piled salt in a small dish placed by the front door works for the purification of a premises and warding off evil spirits. I'd seen things like this before. I mean, it was the countryside and all, and traditions and beliefs seemed to be held in greater respect here than in the big cities. I'd seen them before, but not ever to the same extent as this. It felt very overkill. Even at a young age, I could see that locals would sometimes set things up like this to commemorate deaths and give people a place to reflect on. It was usually just one structure, though. What were all these altars doing here? Just as I was thinking about that, I was growing more and more concerned. I noticed my brother and I were no longer alone. Off the beaten track, behind one of those thinner trees, was a gray figure of an old man looking directly at me. There wasn't much space for the man to hide behind a tree that thin, and something looked seriously wrong with him. I instinctively turned to my brother and said we needed to get out of here right now. I could tell by the fearful look in his eyes he was thinking the same thing as me. This is the point where I feel like no one ever believes me. I saw dozens of people appear from behind those thin trees with the altars. Young, old, male and female. They all just glared at my brother and I, and we started running. I've never experienced anything quite as frightening as that in my life. We never went back to that part of the woods. I did hear that that area was one of the areas that was heavily bombed in the war, and wondered if perhaps that had something to do with what we saw that day. This is the weirdest damn story to ever happen to me. Personally, I've never had a supernatural experience before, and this also wasn't that. But somehow I think this was even stranger than seeing a ghost would have been. I was at my cousin Nathan's house for one summer. I enjoyed being there. We were about the same age, so we spent a lot of our time together. My aunt and uncle both worked evening shifts and lived about 40 minutes out of town. We had the evenings to do whatever we wanted to do, basically. As fun as that might sound to some, we never really got into any real trouble. There was one night, though, when we were watching some movies, that a thunderstorm rolled into the area. Unlike where I live now, the storms back then lasted for quite a while and could get really ferocious at points. The lightning was bright, and the thunder was extremely loud. We were watching scary movies, which I always figured boys of that age tend to do. The storm amplified even more just how scared we were getting, but maybe because we weren't alone and had done this many times before, we weren't truly worried about anything. Suddenly, after a bolt of lightning lit up the outside, I heard Nathan yell. When I asked him what was wrong, he said it looked like there was someone outside the window watching us. Of course, I thought he was joking and just trying to scare me, but he did sound pretty terrified. When I looked over in that direction, I thought I could see the figure outside too. Quickly, Nathan jumped up and ran to the door, locking it. The figure moved away from the window as quickly as Nathan had got up. I wondered if the figure had made a dash to get to the door. The question was immediately answered when a loud pounding began. Of course, there was no way we were going to open the door. We were both scared out of our minds. We asked who was there through the closed door, but the man didn't identify himself. He just started yelling in this crazy-sounding voice, "Let me in. I want to get in!" He didn't sound scared or anything. It was not a plea. It was a demand. "No fucking way!" Nathan yelled back. The man began pounding on the door even harder before he stopped altogether. We saw him move away from the door and realized he might be moving around to the back of the house. Both Nathan and I ran to the back door and got there just in time to lock it too. But unlike the small windows on the front door, the back door had much bigger ones. We were able to see the man and his appearance, and that made the whole thing even creepier. He had a scraggly gray beard and long wild hair. When he saw us, he grinned a nearly toothless grin. A man pounded on the door once again, demanding we let him in right now. He began slamming on the glass, and we thought he was trying to break it. I ran and grabbed a large kitchen knife, while Nathan ran out of the room. I brandished the knife at the man and told him he'd better leave right now, but he kept pounding on the window, finally causing it to break in. I think he managed to cut himself, though, because he suddenly yelled out in pain. That didn't keep him from reaching for the door handle, though, to try and unlock the door. And that's when I heard a bang that was not thunder at all. Looking to the side of me with my ears ringing, I saw that Nathan had gotten himself one of his dad's guns. He must have fired it, but I don't know if he hit the man or the door. The man quickly withdrew his hand and moved away. We went to all the windows of the house, looking to see if he was still outside somewhere, but we couldn't find any sight of him. We couldn't do anything about the window, but we remained in the living room with the gun in tow in case the guy came back. We must have scared him off, though, because he never appeared again. I thought Nathan would get in trouble for using the gun without permission, but his parents were just happy we were not hurt. When I was in elementary school, my best friend's house was basically a straight shot down the road from the school, except it was a couple of streets over. In order to get there quickly, we had to cut through a few yards on the way. Although we walked to her house frequently, we never really developed a routine for which yards we would cut through. We'd just walk a bit, cut through whichever one, and then walk the rest of the way home. On this particular day, I remember it was raining. We were running at home and decided at random which yard to cut through. My friend was running in front of me, drops of mud ricocheting onto me from her shoes. That was when I noticed a particularly odd piece of paper stuck in the bushes. For some reason unknown to my memory, I decided to investigate this strange sight. This memory is kind of surreal to me, because the paper was just kind of there and I was already in a hurry to get home. It was really starting to pour out. For some reason, though, I felt compelled, as if I needed to check this out. I go to the paper and uncrumple it, only to discover that inside was a hand-drawn picture of a huge veiny eyeball staring at my first and last name written underneath it. Needless to say, that scared the living Jesus out of me. I've told many people this story, and most don't really believe me. The only people who truly do are my friend and her father. He thought it was the most spectacular thing to ever happen, but I still wonder about it to this very day. Strap in, this is a decently long one. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and this story is about a 33-year-old man. Let's call him Greg. I met him at the gym about a year back or so. I used to go to the gym with my mother, and being an introvert, I very seldom used to engage with or even talk to people. Being in the gym since the last 2 years, I had seen Greg work out and never really caught him staring or even looking in my direction. He was a well-educated, well-spoken man, and I assumed that interacting with him would not pose any threat to me. One day, Greg just randomly walked up to me at the gym and asked to add me on Facebook so he could promote some things regarding his business. I didn't really think much of it, as I'm barely active on the platform anyway. I let him add me. Slowly, our interactions grew in the gym, as well as on social media. I was going through a rough patch, so I would often find myself looking for a friend or perhaps even more. From the very beginning, my mother did not seem to like Greg. She felt that something was off about him. Regardless, I chose to meet him and another mutual friend of ours from the gym for coffee. I wasn't romantically inclined towards Greg, but I wasn't totally opposed to it either. At coffee, our conversations were quite general. But on text, Greg would casually flirt with me a lot. I would just ignore it, but that turned out to be a big mistake. The more I spoke to Greg and the more I found out about him, the more I realized I didn't see any kind of future with him in it, not even as a friend. Eventually, I started backing off, and took longer and longer to reply to his messages. I didn't want to blatantly confront him. After all, we did go to the same gym, and I wanted to avoid any hostility. Greg also slowly backed off as well, and we stopped talking altogether. Fast forward 6 months. I got my dream job and posted about it on Facebook. Greg congratulated me and told me he was proud of me. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and started replying to his texts again. He immediately began making flirtatious remarks toward me, but this time I told him flat out that made me uncomfortable, and I didn't want to be involved with him romantically or sexually. Subsequently, the conversations died down, and we parted on what I thought were cordial terms. He would often send me messages asking for feedback on some of his work, but I would generally ignore them. Now, in July of this year, Greg messaged me once more, asking for some feedback. He also sent another message asking whether I would like to withdraw from his broadcast list. I respectfully told him I would like to withdraw, since I didn't think I was qualified enough to give him appropriate feedback anyway. He went completely off on me, sending a bunch of messages, most of which I did not understand. I asked for context, and he told me I was only getting that over a call. I agreed. Another mistake. We spoke for 2 hours, wherein I made it very clear that he was only a friend and nothing more. He agreed and was very respectful throughout. Because of that, I assumed there was no harm in simply talking to him. For a couple of weeks, we spoke as friends before he started proposing me being a future work partner for a music venture. I was hesitant and would shoot his invitations to meet down by making various excuses. After about 3 weeks of this, he began making sexual remarks toward me. It made me uncomfortable, and I told him that I didn't want to talk to him anymore since we weren't on the same page. He started to get angry. He told me that if I wouldn't meet him, he didn't want to talk to me anymore either. I thought to myself, good riddance. I was getting increasingly tired of him calling me throughout the day and talking always about his inflated self-image. He told me something like he'd contact me after a year and we could meet then if I reconsidered my feelings toward him. I was growing impatient. I just wanted him out of my life. I was off my phone the next day for 6 to 7 hours. When I came back, I was welcomed to numerous missed calls and messages, most of which were threatening in nature. He threatened to show up to my house and kill me and my family. This is when I realized I may need to involve my family and the police. I told my parents everything. They didn't immediately contact the police, though. These could just be empty threats from a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. The following day, Greg got my parents' numbers and started sending them threatening messages, claiming he would abduct me if they didn't make me marry him. We contacted the police. They went straight to Greg's home to investigate. But seeing his behavior, out on the roof half naked, screaming at the sky, they declared him mentally unfit and told us he could not be arrested. We withdrew the complaint and contacted higher law authorities. Whilst we were awaiting a response, Greg allegedly committed a crime in a 5-star hotel. He attacked a female employee and a guest with a knife and tried to rape the employee. Consequently, an FIR was filed, which led to Greg being admitted to a mental institution. He stayed there for a couple of days and now walks completely free. We were able to file another complaint against him, which was taken more seriously this time. However, we were advised not to create a case, as he would easily get off on bail. So he still roams free and still continues to contact me from unknown numbers every once in a while, making me feel like I'm under constant threat whenever I'm outside my house. My name is Bree. This happened in 2016. I was 19 years old at the time. I was up late the night before into the early morning studying, and I hadn't had very much sleep. I had just woken up from a nap I'd taken to catch up, and I decided to hop in the shower to wake myself up a bit. And that's when I started to hear this weird scraping sound coming from somewhere outside. I stopped the shower and peered out from behind the curtain. I then made my way over to the window. I couldn't see anything out there, but I could still hear that scraping noise. I thought it may have been my neighbor working in a shed or something, so I ignored the disturbance and finished up my showering business before I continued. I should inform you that I have severe anxiety problems, and I often get a little bit paranoid. It doesn't help that I have a form of PTSD as well. Anyway, I was now back in my room. I took a seat on my bed and texted my boyfriend. I asked him what he wanted for dinner. While I was waiting for him to respond, I relaxed and scrolled through my Facebook. I was reading an article about the recent clown sightings that were happening at the time. That was when I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming from outside. I stopped and listened in carefully. I could hear more footsteps, followed by a tapping noise. I was a bit confused. It hadn't yet occurred to me that I could have an unwelcomed guest outside. I was thinking to myself, why wouldn't my boyfriend knock on the door or call before he showed up? We usually had a routine with things like this, especially if I was home alone. He would either call or FaceTime me to let me know when he was on his way. There had been a lot of shady activity around our neighborhood at the time. I called out, and suddenly all fell silent. I texted my boyfriend and asked him if that was him at the door. There was no reply. I decided to peek through the bedroom window. While I was making my way to the other side of the room, my phone started ringing. It was my boyfriend wanting to FaceTime. When I answered, he said he was 15 minutes away. As I was talking to him, I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, and that's when all the blood in my veins turned to ice. I found myself face to face with a clown. I knew I wasn't hallucinating. An actual clown was looking at me through the window, smiling. After my initial shock, I actually started to laugh, thinking that this had to be some sort of prank my boyfriend was pulling on me. I played along, pretending to be terrified, and whispered into my phone. Very funny. I love the whole scary clown thing. I chuckled and rolled my eyes. My boyfriend was very confused. I explained to him about the clown at the window and said that he and his friend had done a good job scaring the piss out of me again. He said that all his friends were hanging out at the pub and that he was not part of any plans to prank me. Upon hearing this, I felt my stomach in my throat. I looked back at the clown outside. He reached into his costume and pulled out a very real-looking knife. By this point, I wasn't sure what was going on. I grabbed up my baseball bat. My boyfriend told me he was now only a few minutes away and shouted at me to stay inside and lock all the doors and windows. I quickly closed the curtains and went into the lounge. It wasn't long before I heard a loud pounding at the front door. Suddenly, I heard a creepy voice coming from the other side. "Let me in." I didn't respond to that voice. I stood perfectly still, waiting for their next move. The loud pounding rang out again, causing the door to rattle in its hinges, but I kept quiet even as I heard the doorknob rattling. I was pretty scared at this point, but I was also getting really irritated. Eventually, I had enough and yelled out, "Hey, fuck off! Go annoy someone else!" I heard a muffled laughter, followed by the creepy voice once more. "Please let me in, doll. I just want to play. I want to play with your insides." I had enough of this. I was about to go outside and beat this guy's ass myself. That was when I heard my boyfriend's voice, who was still on the phone. He said to hang up and call the cops. After some consideration, I thought maybe confronting the clown outside holding a knife was not the correct course of action, so I did as my boyfriend said. I left the lounge and was soon explaining the situation to the police dispatcher. I was on my way back to my room when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I stopped in my tracks and told him I thought the guy had just broken into my house. They immediately told me to get somewhere safe. And that's when I heard my boyfriend yelling out, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of here! The police are on their way!" The clown just bellowed out a psychotic laugh. They took off. As I made my way back into the bedroom, something caught my eye. I peered out the window through a gap in the curtains and saw another clown. He appeared to be holding some sort of blade in his hand. I went to move, but I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I couldn't do anything. Fear overcame me as I realized my boyfriend was out there with these two creepy clowns. I screamed into the phone that there was another one outside my bedroom. After a few moments, I was relieved when I heard my boyfriend at the back door. I let him inside, and we held each other until the police arrived. After taking our statements, the police discovered a rusted hacksaw and an axe lying on the ground outside my bedroom window. Of course, the creepy clowns that had turned my night into a freak show were nowhere to be found. After that night, I struggled to fall asleep. I often think to myself, what would have happened to me if I had been stupid enough to open that door? Were they just a couple of thrill seekers looking to frighten a girl who was all alone? Or were they in fact out for blood? Okay, so buckle up because this is going to get weird. This isn't something unknown amongst my friends and the people local to me, as I live in quite a small town. In grade 5, I would have been about 13 or 14, and I had no friends. I was and still am kind of weird, and it tended to throw people off. Making friends in high school was so difficult for me because I refused to change who I was just to fit in. During the second week of school, I met George in my English class. Our teacher had sat us together, and we had begun talking and building a friendship. George seemed very nice, and we had a lot in common as well. He had come from a different elementary school. It was odd because people from his area commonly went to a different high school, although he insisted he wanted to go to this one because there were certain classes he wanted to take that the other school didn't offer. After about a week of talking together during English, he asked if I wanted to eat lunch with him. We had the same lunch period, and he said he noticed how often I sat alone. I thought it was the nicest gesture, so I agreed. We ended up having lunch together for a while, but then I started making some new friends. I always invited him to eat lunch with a few of the friends I had made, but he always declined. Then, one day in English, he passed me a note. This was very strange since we were sitting right next to each other. It said something like, "I need to talk to you. Can we please sit alone together for lunch?" I wrote back I would sit down with him, and we hardly spoke for the rest of the period. I started getting really weird vibes from him. So, lunchtime rolled around. I saw him sitting at the end of a row. I go to sit down and he says, "No, let's go outside to talk." I agreed. He looked really upset. I wanted to know what was going on. When we got outside, he led me over to sit on a curb in front of the school and started talking very aggressively. He told me it was unfair of me to make other friends when he was the one who'd befriended me first. He told me I had to eat lunch with him because when I was alone, he ate lunch with me. Now that he was alone, I was obligated to do the same. It was a very bizarre conversation. I explained that he could sit with me and my friends, and that way there would be no issues. He could even make some new friends himself. I had enough friendship to spread around, and he had nothing to be upset about. What he said next completely shocked me. I could see the anger in his eyes. He grabbed my arm real hard. "I don't think you understand. You owe me this. You will sit with me." I got freaked out at that point and told him we could sit alone together every other day. I just wanted to get away from him and go back inside where more people were around. After that day, I started getting these weird messages in my email. I'll never forget the first one. All it said was, "All women are Satan. The devil lives in all of you." I didn't recognize the address and assumed it was some internet troll trying to scare me. Then they started coming more frequently, all with the same type of message. I started getting scared, so I showed my friends these emails. They agreed that it was weird, but also agreed it was probably some random person just trying to scare people. One of my friends, though, told me that she thought it was George. She had heard some stories about why he'd come to our school instead of going to the other one. She told me he was so obsessed with one of the girls in his class that her mom had to get a restraining order against him over the summer. I told her that sounded insane, and I didn't believe it. I was having lunch with George on alternate days, and we were still friendly during English class, but I was trying to distance myself from him. After Christmas break, our schedules changed for second semester. I was very happy about this, because I knew I'd have a different lunch period and we wouldn't have English together anymore. I could slowly disassociate myself from him. I was wrong. He started leaving notes in my locker, confessing his undying love and explaining that we were meant to take over the world together. The feelings were very much not mutual. I had to tell him that enough was enough. I explained he was overwhelming me, and I needed space from our friendship. He seemed to understand. He didn't get upset or yell. He just agreed to give me my space. In the meantime, the emails started getting much worse. They started threatening my life, telling me they knew where I lived and went to school. I went straight to my mom when this started happening. My mom called the police. The police informed the school. The school looked up the email in their records and found out it was indeed George sending those emails all along. He was suspended and wouldn't even look at me after. I was honestly so relieved. 1 year after we graduated high school, George and his mother went out for a drive. While she was driving, he stabbed her over 100 times. When the police found him, he tried saying it was a car accident, but when they questioned him further about all the stab wounds, he admitted to killing her. He claimed he was trying to release the devil from his mother's soul. He pleaded insanity and was found not criminally responsible for her murder. It was Halloween night in Shibuya. If you've seen the news reports or been there in person, you'll know all about the huge gatherings of people in fancy dress costumes. Maybe not this year though, I guess. I want to tell you about the scariest thing that's ever happened to me back in 2017. I'm a woman, by the way. My friends and I decided we would go to Shibuya in costume. We saw hundreds of others, all gathered around the famous crossing, dressed up in their Halloween finest. The October air was full of enthusiasm for the holiday. It was so crammed with so many people. As we walked across the crossing, I could smell sweat and alcohol. My feet were being trampled on over and over. There was garbage everywhere. I was kind of regretting coming at this point. The oncoming crowd pushed past me, and it separated me from my friends. I started searching for them as best I could, but when everyone's wearing masks and costumes, it's difficult. Everyone around was just completely drunk and stumbling everywhere. I didn't stand a chance of finding them like this. I decided to find a less crowded area, and there I would try to text or call them. Before I knew it, I had entered an empty back alley with no one around. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down and compose myself. I was pretty annoyed at the situation. I could hear the noise coming from the crossing area still. As I started to calm down, a shabby man began to amble towards me and sat down close by. Had he been there the whole time, I wondered? I couldn't figure out if he was in a costume or what he was supposed to be. He looked kind of like a shaman or something. He had long, greasy hair. I looked closer, and honestly, it looked like he was wearing bits of costume he'd found out on the street. Some parts were like a witch's costume. Then there were the bright polka dot tights, a fancy hat, other parts that looked like a clown's costume. Very weird. Nothing about his costume matched at all. As he stared at me, I just ignored him. I tried to walk away and past him, and then he did something I really didn't expect. He shot right up to his feet and grabbed my arm hard. He blocked my path and whispered in my ear, "Give me some candy." I couldn't move at all. I tried to wriggle free from his grasp, but he was so strong. His words were slurred, and he sounded in a daze. It was truly horrifying. I didn't know what else to do, so I rooted through my bag looking for something to give him. "Haven't you heard of trick or treat? You don't want a trick, do you?" He was slurring. It was at this point I noticed he'd pulled his hand out of the pocket of his hoodie, and he was brandishing a knife. I didn't know if it was one of those fake knives or not, but I surely didn't want to find out. Sweat was running down my face. He chuckled and repeated again and again his trick or treat. I was still blindly searching in my bag for some candy when I saw someone dressed as a police officer. I screamed for help at the officer. He looked my way and walked down the alley towards us. The weird guy who had a hold of me just stared at the oncoming person. "Thank God I'm saved," I thought to myself as he walked over. "What's the matter, miss?" the guy called out as he approached. "Are you not giving this man his candy?" He gave a smile and pulled a gun out of his side holster. He aimed at my head. "Trick or treat." He grinned. I'd never felt so helpless in my life. I felt betrayed and alone. I felt as if this was the end for me. I didn't know what to do. There was no one around, and everyone in earshot would never hear me if I screamed. They might not even hear the sound of the gun. I was still absent-mindedly rooting through my bag when my finger touched something. Just as the man with the gun approached me and put his hand on my wrist, I flung it out of my bag onto the floor. They both let go of me and scrabbled around on the floor to reach this thing. I ran as fast as I could back to the crowd of people, and eventually I was reunited with my friends. I have no idea what happened that night, who those people were, or if it was a prank. Either way, it was horrible. I really do hope it was just a prank. I was invited to Halloween in Shibuya the next year, and of course I politely declined. Just because there are many people around in the center of a city doesn't mean it's a safe place. Please take care out there, guys. Way back in 2013, I was 22 years old. I wanted to sell an old computer I had. It wasn't good enough to take into a shop or anything. It was kind of a piece of junk that I thought someone else could find use of. At the time, Craigslist was the only place I really knew of that you could post and sell things on. Honestly, I'd never heard any bad things happening from it. It seemed like an easy-to-access site that people nearby could get discounts from, and I trusted the area I lived in as well. I really had no second thoughts when I listed the PC on the site. It only took a day before I received an email from someone willing to pay me that listed price. Of course, that's assuming it worked as I said it did. I assured him that he could test it out when he picked it up, and we set up a time to do the exchange. It was the following morning. He said his name was Cameron, and he'd send me an email when he was on his way over. On the next day, I got up early and waited until 11 a.m. when he was supposed to show up. I was expecting his email to say he was coming, but he never sent anything. At 11:15, with still no email and no signs of him even coming, I decided to open up the blinds and watch TV, while keeping an eye outside just in case he did show up. There was nothing until about 11:45. From the corner of my eye, I saw a car slowly coming down the road and up to the front of my house. They stopped right on the curb, keeping the car running. Thinking that must be him, I paused the TV and waited, but several minutes passed by, and the car didn't move or turn off. Suddenly, they turned back onto the road and drove away. I got up and went over to the window, looking out and not really understanding what that just was. I didn't know if it was Cameron or just some random person that just happened to coincidentally stop there for some reason. I closed the blinds and sent an email, asking if he was coming or not. There was never any response. After an hour, I was done waiting. I went on with my day, forgetting about the whole thing. I had lunch and eventually dinner, then got in bed early, around 9 p.m. or so. I had to work the next day. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up some time after. I looked at the clock and it was only 11 p.m. It had barely been 2 hours. I closed my eyes again and tried to get back to sleep, but a very faint thumping sound forced my eyes open. I stayed laying there quietly, waiting to hear another so I could figure out what it was. Only a moment later it came again. It was coming from somewhere downstairs, but it wasn't something I'd heard before. I had no idea what it could be. Worried there may be a problem with the house, I got up and went into the hallway, then over to the stairs. I heard it several more times as I made my way down. It also started to get louder, being much more than just a quiet thump. I slowed down, stepping quietly through the kitchen, and turned the corner into the back hall. As I stared down the dim hallway, another thud rang through the house from directly at the end. When my eyes adjusted, I could see the faint outline of a figure moving outside the window. My heart stopped for a second. Then another heavy thud shook it, causing me to jump and step back. The figure stood still and faced the window. Then the shadow became more clear as they leaned their face in close, pressing against the glass. I saw their eyes lock onto me. That moment of horror felt like it lasted for minutes, but I know it was only a second or two before they backed up and sprinted away. I ran and called the police, but they had obviously gotten away by then. Despite it seeming like an easy case of it being the man from Craigslist, Cameron, it wasn't so simple. There really was no evidence of being him, other than it happening on the same day I was supposed to meet him. I don't know what that person wanted either, but the bolt holding the window down had divots on the outside, as if they were trying to break it out of the windowsill. I never found out anything else, but I also never took to using Craigslist again. This happened last October, when I was on my way home from a drinking night with my work colleagues. I caught the last train home and arrived at my station right as it came to about 1 a.m. It was Halloween, which was something I didn't particularly care about, since we don't really do much for it here in Japan. I live in quite a rural area, so the station was empty, or so I thought. As I walked down towards the ticket gate, I saw a woman in a costume. She seemed a bit too old to be a trick-or-treater, I thought to myself. As I drew closer, I recognized that she was wearing some sort of witch costume. She looked as if she was waiting for someone. At the moment I passed her by, she abruptly called out to me though. "Hey, where do you live?" I continued walking. It was so surreal. I just looked back over my shoulder. She was stood there staring at me. She had long, dark, messy hair, and I remember at the time that only one of her eyes were visible through it. That kind of freaked me out. It was a bit dark in this underground station, and it was an eerie sight to see her standing there. I didn't know how else to explain it. There's no reason to get involved, don't respond, I told myself, as I upped my pace and headed out the exit. It takes about 15 minutes to get home from the station on foot. At that time of night, in my rural area, I knew there would be practically no one out on the streets. It did make me feel a little nervous while I was walking home. I could hear dogs howling in the distance, and my footsteps seemed to echo behind me. It was all adding to this eerie ambiance. I kept looking over my shoulder. When I turned around a corner to see someone stood underneath a streetlight, the silhouette of a woman, I wanted to pass by quickly. Something was really off about tonight, the first time I'd ever felt this way on Halloween. "Where do you live?" a familiar voice asked. Shivers raced up and down my spine. It was that same woman in the Halloween costume from the station. I looked back, and she took a step toward me. I started bolting. I ran, checking over my shoulder. I ran out of breath eventually, and got a real stitch too. Goddamn beers. I had to stop in a dark alleyway to take a break. I looked back behind me, and I couldn't find that woman anywhere. I walked down the alley feeling a bit relieved. "Where do you live?" My heart froze. What the hell was happening? I was shaking. This time I didn't see her at all. I didn't even hear her coming. It sounded as if she was directly above me or something. I spun around in every direction. I was really panicking now. I shut my eyes for a second, and when I opened them, I saw her emerging from behind something, slowly walking toward me. "Where do you live?" Why is this happening to me? My legs were trembling. Even though I was still drunk, I'd never felt fear like that before or since. I didn't know what to do. This lady wouldn't leave me alone, and if I walked all the way home, she would surely find a way to follow me. I pointed to a random house across the street from the alley and blurted out that I lived there. The woman in the costume turned her head slowly toward the house I was pointing at. She then gave a big smile and looked back at me one last time, then back toward the house. With that strange woman now distracted, I took my opportunity to run for it again. I looked over my shoulder to see if she was still following me, but she was just stood still, staring at the house I'd pointed at. She was so creepy. Was this some kind of Halloween prank? I had no idea, but I didn't want to find out. I got home and triple-checked all the doors and windows were locked. I stayed up half the night, watching out the window to see if the woman was out there somewhere. I didn't see her, though. Time went by, but I couldn't forget about that strange experience. I can't really remember her face that well, and my memory's a little bit hazy from being drunk. I still get shivers every now and then when I think about that night. A few weeks after the incident on a Sunday, I was taking a walk with my daughter in the neighborhood. I noticed a moving truck, and the truck was parked right outside the house I'd pointed at that day. I remembered that woman's voice, asking me where I lived. I shuddered. I thought to myself at the time, surely it's a coincidence. The people who lived there were just moving out for something else. But honestly, I wondered if maybe she did something to them that made them want to move out. The owners of the house came out holding boxes and looked exhausted and miserable. Something must have happened there. I could still hear that woman's voice ringing in my head. Where do you live? I grabbed my child's hand and started to walk away as fast as I could. I don't go anywhere near that area now, if I can avoid it. A couple of years ago, I moved out of my dorm room and into a new apartment. Of the few pieces of furniture that we had in the dorm, none of it was mine, so I was basically in need of everything. I had more money than I did before, and was planning to save for a few more months before making a bunch of purchases on things for the apartment. There were still a few things I did need right away though. One of these was a bed frame, but they were all really expensive. After buying a new mattress, I was really trying not to drop a whole fat stack of cash on a new frame too. I pulled up a few used furniture sites, but eventually landed on Craigslist, as it had the most postings there. A lot of them were really cheap, or even free, but those ones all looked horrible. Then I came across one that didn't look too bad. It was just a plain old wooden bed frame that didn't look too beat up. I sent a quick email asking if it was still available, then went on with my search. About a minute later, I got a reply. The man said it was still available for $35. That was a perfect deal for me. I quickly accepted his offer, and we set up a time to meet later that day at 6. While I waited, I unboxed some of my things and moved a bunch of stuff around in the bedroom to make some space for that new frame. At 5:30, the man emailed me his address. It was about 20 minutes away, in an area I hadn't been to yet. Well, I wasn't exactly familiar with anywhere around here too well though, since I'd just moved. I grabbed some cash and headed out. As I drove, I looked around frequently, trying to get myself familiar with what was around me. About halfway there, everything sort of dropped off though. The town I was in very quickly ended, and the area became a lot less populated, with buildings or houses. It was not what I'd expected. As I got to the neighborhood this house was supposed to be in though, I felt a little bit better. The houses weren't too far apart, and it did look mostly normal. However, they were definitely not nice-looking houses. I pulled up to the address and parked in the driveway. The lights were on, and the front door had been left open. I got out and walked up, ringing the doorbell. The man came a moment later. He was tall and heavy, wearing a hat and jacket. He invited me inside. The man didn't look strange in any way, but something about him made me feel weird. It was just the way he talked, I guess, kinda like we'd been buddies for years now. I followed him upstairs and down the hallway that led to a small bedroom. We stepped into the room, and I was immediately confused. The room was occupied with a dresser, nightstand, and even clothes laying around. The bed frame still had a mattress on it, with sheets and blankets as well. I clarified with him that I was only wanting to buy the frame, and not the mattress or anything else. He said of course. I looked back over at the bed frame, seeing that it looked fine. I said I'd buy it, and he smiled. He offered to help me drag it out to my truck, but said he'd want a drink before we got to it. The man walked back into the hallway and came back immediately with 2 glasses of beer that he must have been keeping in the next room over. He held one out to me, but I politely declined. The man looked very confused. "Come on, it'll be fun." He acted like we might as well hang out since we were already here. I told him I was really busy that night, and I just wanted to buy the bed frame and get out of there. He was being really pushy though. His smile became noticeably less genuine as he urged me to have a sip of this drink with him. I quickly stepped past him and out into the hallway, not wanting to be cornered into that small room. I told him I was going to leave. I turned to walk out, and he immediately changed his attitude. He started being overly nice, apologizing, and asking if I wanted to take the bed frame for free even. I ignored him and began walking faster down the stairs. I heard the man coming after me down the hallway. I was able to get out before he caught up to me, and I saw him standing at the front door as I pulled away. Maybe he was just some lonely guy living out there that wanted a buddy to hang out with, but that was all just a little too strange. I mean, the supposed bed frame and room it was in were clearly in use by someone. When I got home that night, I checked the posting again, but it was deleted. From my memory, though, I knew the bed frame was shown by itself with no mattress or anything on it. Now that I thought about it, that made it even stranger that it wasn't like that when I got there, considering his intent had been to sell it. But whatever that man was up to, I didn't like it, so I just got out of there. Last year, my roommate moved out of the house. We had been renting together for the past 4 years. By then, both of us had gotten better jobs and were getting paid much more. The house we lived in wasn't the best, so it was only a matter of time before one of us moved out to get their own place. After he moved, though, I was able to use more of the space in the house, and actually just decided to stay there for another year or two. This happened during that time, sometime in early December. Our area was going through a week of some pretty bad snowstorms, and the office I worked at allowed us to work from home for a few days, if we wanted to. Obviously, I chose to take them up on that offer. I used my old roommate's bedroom as an office, and worked all throughout the day. At one point while I was working, though, there was a knock at the front door. I left the room to check who this was. There was a man on the porch in a heavy winter jacket. He didn't seem to be a worker or a delivery person of any kind, just some regular old Joe. I opened the door, getting hit by a rush of snow and wind. Yeah? How can I help you?" The man smiled and apologized for interrupting my day. He explained his situation. He said his car had gotten stuck in the snow right on the side of the road next to my house, and he didn't have a phone on him. He asked if he could borrow mine to call someone for help. Obviously skeptical, I told him to give me a moment. I then closed my door and went to the other side of the house. I looked out the window at the road he was supposedly stuck on. There was a small SUV out there that looked like it had slidden on some ice onto the curb and gotten stuck in the snowbank. Now that I was pretty sure he was not lying about that, I grabbed a jacket and put on some shoes. Then I went back to the front door. I was still a bit skeptical, of course, but I stood on the porch with him as he used my phone to call his brother, just so that if he tried to run with it or anything, I could chase after him and prevent him from leaving. After a quick call, the man simply handed my phone back and thanked me, then walked away. I went inside and checked out the window, seeing the man getting in his car. Thinking everything had been settled and resolved quite peacefully, I went back to the office and started working again. Around 7 o'clock or so, I felt like I'd done enough for the day and took the rest of the night off. It was then that I remembered about that man in his car from earlier. I went to check and see if he'd gotten the help he needed, and was surprised to find that car was still there. I could see the man moving around inside of it. It had been almost 3 hours by then, which made me wonder how he was still stuck there. Maybe he was waiting for his brother to get off work and pick him up or something? I didn't know. I went to the kitchen and made some dinner, then sat down on the couch to watch some TV. I stayed up until about 9:30, then went upstairs to shower and get ready for bed. I turned the water on and hopped in the shower, but after a few minutes, there was a sudden and abrupt banging on the front door. It was loud and harsh, and completely jump-scared me. I was put into a fear-induced frozen state for a moment. The banging was so hard it was actually shaking the walls. Even across the entire house, I could still hear that it was coming from the front door. They were hitting it non-stop. I could even hear them aggressively shaking the door handle. It was such a sudden burst of chaos that I wasn't sure what to make of it. I turned off the shower and quickly got dressed, but as I left my room and walked down the hallway, everything stopped altogether. It was now completely silent. No more sounds at all. I stopped in place, hearing only the wind from outside, and feeling a bit of eeriness set in. I slowly walked downstairs and up to the front door. Nobody was there anymore. I quickly ran to the window and saw that car was still there. The man was no longer inside of it, though. Not knowing what was going on, I simply decided to call the police. When they came, they noticed multiple sets of shoe prints in the snow, but they were covered up by the storm soon after. They took the license plate of the car, though, and found a picture of the owner. From what I could tell, it was the same guy I'd helped on my porch. In the following days, they waited for him to return, but as far as I know, he never did. It's really disturbing to think about what could have happened that night right outside my door. Was it that same man desperately trying to get in for some reason? Or was it someone with malicious intent? It seems that most people I've told this story, including the police, think the man was running from someone and trying to get help. But what happened afterwards is very much up for debate. Nothing is really known about where that man is now, or what he was running from. They're just a few questions on a long list that will probably never be answered. I'm a 23-year-old woman, but this event took place when I was 15. Growing up, my mom was an addict, and my dad was absent. My mom's boyfriend was abusive too. Fighting, screaming, and chaos was all typical of Dave, my mom's boyfriend at the time. He was deep into drugs as well as my mom, and there'd be random strangers constantly coming in and out of the house at all hours of the day. Due to the absence of any proper guardianship, I'm sure you can guess that I ended up in with the wrong crowd by age 13. I was sneaking out to meet boys, drinking, smoking, and doing other things a typical 13-year-old kid should never do. When I was 15, I met this guy named Tyler. I'm using his real name because fuck him. We met one night when me and a few friends were trying to find someone to buy us alcohol. Being stupid teenagers, we would usually just ask strangers who were going into the store. Tyler was the first person we'd asked that night. He said yes and got our drinks for us, then met us in the parking lot where we were waiting for him. He asked us where we were headed and what we were getting into tonight. One of my friends, who we'll call Sarah, told him we were just hanging out and walking around. We lived in a big city with lots of busy streets, so we'd usually just kinda walk around until we found something that caught our interest. On this night, it was already past 10 p.m. Everywhere was closing and the roads were emptying quickly as well. Tyler then invited us to join him in his car and drive around. Us being stupid kids went with him. Sarah and our other friend, who we'll call Kate, sat in the back together. I was up in the front passenger seat. At the time, I was really excited to sit by him. I thought he was a hot older guy with a car. I was way too naive to realize this guy was actually a creep. At first, I thought the drive was quite fun. He took us along a back road that went alongside a river, with trees and railroad tracks on the other side. He drove fast, and had his music turned up so loud it was shaking the entire car. He started smoking a blunt and we all joined in on it. Honestly, it was a good time. I didn't see the danger I was putting myself in, or the reckless behavior of this mysterious man that we'd just left with. I'd been sipping on my drink during the drive. At one point, he told me to chug it, which I stupidly did. I was only a 92-pound child, so inevitably I got blasted. That night is pretty faded in some parts. I remember him placing his hand on my thigh throughout the drive. I didn't mind in that state of mind because I really thought I liked him. By the end of the night, Sarah and Kate had to head off home, and Tyler said he'd drop us all off at the store we'd met at before. I got out of the car and he asked me for my phone number. I gave it to him and he kissed me before I got out. I started walking home with my friends. The rest of the night completely blurs out. The next morning, when I checked my phone, I had a text from him. It said something along the lines of, "I want to see you again. I had a real good time." Again, being a naive 15-year-old, I was very happy about this. The following weekend, we all met up again, and he bought us some more drinks. We went for a ride, and he drove fast and played loud music. We smoked and drank again, except this time he grabbed my hand the entire time. This became our routine quickly. He'd pick us up nearly every weekend for months on end. Tyler and I eventually began dating, even though I knew nothing about him. He'd never talk about himself, because all we'd do was drive and listen to loud music. Again, I didn't see an issue with it. I thought this man was awesome. Until this happened. One of the weekends we were all supposed to meet, I got a text from him, asking if it could just be me and him this time. Luckily, my instincts actually kicked in, and I told him I wasn't feeling well. I didn't want to ditch my friends. They were already on their way to meet me. The night went on as normal, us girls hanging out on my porch and gossiping, when suddenly his car drove really slowly past my house. He didn't stop, but instead kept going down the road. Immediately, I got a kind of weird feeling. Within 2 minutes, I'd received a message from him. "Why did you lie to me?" I replied, "I'm not lying, they just came to bring me some snacks. They were checking in on me, you know?" I was definitely continuing to lie. I remember him getting really upset. He should be the one to bring me things. He should be the one to check up on me. I was feeling a little guilty until Kate asked me, "Hey, has he been here before? How did he know where you live?" That's when my brain finally started to think, hey, something's not right about that. Obviously, we always met him at the store. He'd never picked me up or dropped me off at my house, and we'd never talked about where we lived. I texted him again. I asked him how he knew where I was. He played it off like he'd accidentally stumbled down my street, and just so happened to be driving very slowly by my house specifically. Whatever. I didn't reply. I had been distracted by my friends. Eventually they left and I went back inside, getting ready for bed. I showered, brushed my teeth, turned on the TV. The sounds of whatever my mom and her people were doing downstairs in the basement were ringing throughout the house. I remember waking up at 4:12 a.m. I checked my phone to see what time it was. I'd been woken up by a notification text from Taylor. "Hey, can you meet me?" It was sent just shortly ago. I texted back telling him I was sleeping, but he insisted on seeing me. I had to firmly reply no before turning my phone on Do Not Disturb. I went back to sleep. When I woke up that morning and turned my phone off Do Not Disturb, texts started to flood in, as well as missed calls. All from Tyler, as I'm sure you guessed. Hundreds of them. I read each one as they flooded through my screen, noticing his attitude and tone changed throughout the night. He started off saying he missed me and wanted to see me. Later on, he was calling disgusting names and threatening me. I had 20 missed calls from him as well. My heart sank to my stomach when I noticed a photo of him. It was a selfie of him holding a weapon to his head. He was smiling with his eyes wide open. It scared me so bad that I texted him back, which I'm sure was his goal. I told him I was sorry for falling asleep, and I didn't mean to ignore him. "Can we meet now?" was his only response. I was beginning to feel a little creeped out and threatened by him, obviously, so I declined. I told him I didn't think this was going to work out. I blocked his number. I really thought that would be the end of whatever this was. I simply moved on from it. I'd basically forgotten all about him, and it was just a memory to me now. Weeks had passed by when I got a message request from an account on Facebook I didn't recognize. I accepted it to see what they'd say. It was a picture of the outside of my house. My heart felt like it had stopped, and I felt the color rush from my face. I knew immediately this must be Tyler. I messaged them back and told them to leave me alone, or I'd tell my stepdad. I didn't hear anything for the rest of the day until late that night. It was around 11, and I was home alone for the night. My mom and her man had gone to the cinema. I got a message, another photo. I remember feeling nervous and scared. I opened the message. It was a picture of me sitting on the edge of my bed looking at my phone. It was in my previous day's outfit. He had taken a photo of me the night before. That creep had been watching me from outside my window just last night. I didn't even realize he was there. I immediately began to panic, not knowing how to handle this situation on my own. My phone got another message. "Come outside," he said. I was frozen. I didn't know if he was trying to scare me or what his intentions were, but I knew this was not good. I didn't reply. I was too scared to even move. I was completely frozen. Another message came in. "Hey, I'm at your front door." I checked my Ring camera, and sure enough, there he was standing right on my front porch, phone in hand. He was typing something out as I watched. I was so scared that I called the police, and they told me to stay in my room and lock my door. The whole time, he continued telling me to come out and meet him. I even heard him try to get in a few times. After about 5 minutes of complete and utter terror, I heard the police sirens nearing my house. I felt a rush of relief come over me, because I knew this was almost over. To my surprise, he actually stayed, and they took him away in handcuffs. He's still doing time for all the crimes they caught him in. They found weapons, sex toys, drugs, and a gun in his car, along with all the messages he'd sent me. They charged him extra for me being a minor. When I finally found out his age, it made me sick to even think of it. He was almost 30 years old at that time. I was 15. My mom eventually went to rehab and is doing much better. We moved away from that city, and I'm now engaged to a wonderful and loving man. We have a child on the way. My life has gotten a lot better, and I'm happy now, but I can't help but feel an overwhelming amount of fear whenever I think of Tyler. Will he try to find me again when he's released? Will he still be obsessed with me? Or will he do this again to another naive child? Girls and boys out there, please hang out with people your own age. Don't do what I did. Be sure to listen to your parents when they tell you not to talk to strangers, and stay safe out there. I live in Irvine, California, which, if you don't know, is the safest large city over 200,000 people in the United States. My whole life, I was never worried about a break-in or anything like that, until one horrifying day. I was lying in bed on a Saturday morning, sleeping in. Suddenly, my dad sprinted into the room and handed me a wooden baseball bat. He was completely out of breath. "Don't leave this room, and don't let anyone touch you." At this point, I was scared shitless. My 12-year-old mind could only imagine what was coming at me. I backed into my closet and clutched that bat for dear life. All of a sudden, the doorbell rang. I just about jumped out of my skin. I was shaking beyond imagination. For all I knew, our house was being raided. Little did I know that wasn't far from the truth. My dad had been outside early in the morning, working in the yard like he usually did. All of a sudden, a young man came around the corner sprinting. He dropped some sort of bag into the bushes and didn't notice for a moment. My dad went over and grabbed it from the bush. The boy turned back around and saw my dad holding it. The boy got in a panic and kept running. Well, apparently it was a bag full of drugs. My dad calmly walked inside and put that bag down. He decided to wait a bit and call the police. He returned outside and started to work again. All of a sudden, around the corner came 2 large SUVs. Out jumped 6 men, all with guns in hand. That's the point. My dad sprinted inside to call the police and hand me the bat. Then the doorbell rang. Of course, we didn't answer it. We waited for the police to arrive. The police never found any of the guys, but that was definitely the scariest moment of my life. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.